I'm Erin Burnett in Israel, and this is CNN.
I mean, he just makes it up. And so he is able to spew enough disinformation that the Chinese must be smiling. When it comes to a holiday from the truth, he's taken the longest vacation.
Republican Senator Mitt Romney of Utah earlier today criticizing Trump for spreading disinformation about the hurricane in this case. Romney also cited Trump's recently disparaging comments about Haitian migrants in Springfield, Ohio, and FEMA. Let's bring in my panel and talk more. Jasmine, let me start with you because I want to talk to you. You've been covering Kamala Harris for a long time. She's on this media blitz right now. Right. Generally not, quote unquote, news outfits, but late night, The View, Howard Stern, et cetera. This key moment on The View really looked like a missed opportunity for Harris. Take a listen.
Would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind in terms of, and I've been a part of most of the decisions that have had impact.
What do you think?
I don't think that was a great response, Jake, particularly because I think one of the largest answers that both her and the former president have to answer this campaign is whether or not you're going to be a change agent, whether or not you're going to make my life better than it has been the last 4 years. And I don't think her saying I wouldn't change anything answers that. In fact, I think it works for the Republicans. Now, to be fair, she came back later on and she said, one thing I would do differently than Biden is I would put a Republican in my cabinet. And she said that she's not too prideful to do the things that are best in the country. I think you can argue whether or not that was kind of a dig at Biden. But still, I don't think that the question is whether or not she can out-Republican Biden. It's whether or not she can create a winning message that tells enough Americans that she is not going to put them in the same position that they've been in, regardless of whether or not the facts are there that Americans are potentially doing better with this economy than maybe they feel. And so I think that that wasn't a great answer. But I'd also kind of blame the prep, because why haven't they given her one interesting thing to say that maybe doesn't critique the current president, but says, hey, this is what I would do differently, or hey, I'm not the same person as Joe Biden.
Yeah, and Kevin, look, obviously she doesn't want to insult President disloyal, pivot and say something like, look, knowing then what we know now, you know, perhaps would have done this differently on Afghanistan, or this differently on immigration, or this differently on inflation. I mean, it's kind of just a missed opportunity.
Yeah, Jake, and of course, as you rightly point out, the vice president came back towards the end of that interview on The View and mentioned that conversation about having a Republican in her cabinet. I think she's actively, threading this needle in terms of not necessarily separating herself too much from the incumbent president, obviously, who has a big draw to white working class folks in some of those key battleground states, while also threading the needle as this candidate of change. And one of the interesting takeaways from this new New York Times Siena poll was that back just last month, Donald Trump, by double digits, led in the question of who represents a change in this battle. And that has now flipped. Now the vice president, by a 46 to 44% margin, is that agent of change in voters' minds, which is a key kind of component heading into the last 4 weeks of this campaign.
Kristin, how would you have advised Kamala Harris to have answered that question or prepared her for it?
Sure. Well, I think you made a great point that you could say what we know now. That's such a gives her some grace on being able to say what she would do differently. Such a missed opportunity for her. She finally, as Kevin mentioned, took back that change agent and really owned that mantra that, across the board. I think it was like 49% of independents in that poll said that she represents change. And then dig further, the questions were, who will personally help me? She's winning on that issue right now in that poll. She's also winning on who cares more about me. Now, where the Trump campaign can completely pounce on this is within an hour of that, they should have taken that clip and overlaid it with the economic numbers, with the Afghanistan withdrawal, with every single blunder of the Biden administration, and have that over and over and over again and hammer it to those independents, to those swing voters in these, suburbs that are going to decide this election.
So something else that we should bring up is Trump is still using rather dehumanizing language when talking about migrants. This is what Trump said on Hugh Hewitt's radio show yesterday when attacking Harris's record on border security.
How about allowing people to come to an open border 13,000 of which were murderers. Many of them murdered far more than one person, and they're now happily living in the United States. You know, now a murderer, I believe this, it's in their genes, and we got a lot of bad genes in our country right now.
There's so much to unpack there. First of all, that 13,000 number is not accurate. That is over years and years, decades, really. They are not living happily in the United States. Many of them are actually in prison. They're just not in ICE custody right now. But then this idea of genes. The campaign went on to say, oh, no, he's referring to murderers having bad genes. But this is something that this is a trope, you know, poisoning our blood. If you Google it, you'll see all the crazy stuff he said about genetics that really feeds into some ugly history in this country.
Yeah, and I think this is a place that the former president is known to be willing and actually, in some ways, excited to dabble into. Obviously, this feeds back into the whole controversy of Haitians eating pets in Ohio. This is something that he continues to bring back to the American apparatus, really, both as red meat to his base, signaling that these are the kind of tropes that he wants to play in, and these are the things that they also believe and could help can garnish their support come November. But I also think it really plays into the vice president's hand. Continuously, I think when you look at this media blitz, no, it's not hard capital N news, but it is also revealing more about herself. Sure. And more importantly, I think it's getting her to react in real time to these kind of news events and these things that former President Trump says that she wasn't really willing to just a month ago. And so I think that those comments, yes, they play into kind of racist, ugly tropes that people don't like to talk about in this country, but they also give a lot of fodder to the vice president.
What do you think?
Well, this just shows really that this election is turning into a base election, both campaigns. I mean, you don't go on Call Her Daddy podcast if you're trying to reach an undecided middle-of-the-road voter. You're playing to your base.
Well, you're trying to get them you're trying to get those young women to vote.
Sure,
it's
well,
not
they're
a question.
probably already voting.
Well, I think it's...
Well, I think a lot of her base is actually in the South, people that are not necessarily Kamala Harris voters. So I don't think it's just her base, but I think that the topics that they talk about are within her realm. Yeah.
This election is going to come down to 6 precincts in Bethlehem and Northampton, Pennsylvania.
Right.
That went for Trump, went for Biden. Whoever's going to convince those 6 precincts, blue collar county, have some more, you know, that's a Trump union, but some new younger Democrats moving in. That's what's going to decide this election. And so both campaigns need to figure out how to reach that voter.
Fascinating stuff. Thanks so much. He recently led one of America's closest allies, and now former Prime Minister Boris Johnson is unleashed. That's the title of his new book. He's sharing what he really thinks about Trump and Harris and Biden and more. He'll join me next.
I'm Natasha Bertrand at the Pentagon, and this is CNN.
Where are you headed?
Where am I headed? Am I just going to take what the market gives me? No, I can do some research.
You know, that's backed by